Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're delighted to be here today on behalf of ourselves, our companies, and also WISER, Women in Sustainable Energy and Resources, which we're all very happy members of, and we welcome all the women here to join us because we're much stronger together, as we all know. So WISER recognises the First Peoples of this nation and their ongoing connection to culture and country, acknowledging them as the traditional owners, custodians and law keepers of the world's oldest living culture. We pay respects to their elders past and present. So our vision is to build a strong sense of belonging for all women in an association that works respectfully and harmoniously with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in sustainable energy, resources and related industries. And we honour the wisdom of the women who have cared for this land for countless generations, and in this spirit we commit to more sustainable practices. So as you heard, my name's Jo Bergamin. I'm the Head of Communications and Sustainability for a Vanadium Junior Explorer. So I'm really at the small end of the market, but an exciting place to be nonetheless. And I'd be remiss to point out, as the chair of WISER today, that by improving and promoting greater gender diversity, the mining industry could not only improve its internal dynamics, but also enhance its external image, making it more attractive to investors, employees, and the general public. But without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome our panellists, each of them leaders in their area of the industry. So Caoilin Chestnutt next to me, she's the Head of Corporate Technical Services at Thiess and also Fund Manager at RFC Ambrian. She graduated in Earth Sciences from Trinity College in Dublin, and she's worked in the global resources industry for over 25 years. Very impressive. Multiple commodities, leadership roles at MEC Mining, MIM, Xstrata, Glencore, Anglo, BHP and Arrow Energy. Literally every part of the industry. So recently she was a finalist of the Women in Industry Awards and winner of the QRC IMARC Exceptional Women in Exploration Award. She's passionate about leadership and developing teams and individuals to perform at their best and commits considerable time to this area. So please welcome Caoilin with me.
How do we follow that?
I know, it's really hard. Really hard. That's why I've got you ladies on, because you're who you are. So Steph Byrom next to her, she's the GM Decarbonisation Services at Loop Decarbonisation Solutions, and she has over 12 years experience in decarb and policy, and she's a passionate and driven leader who aims to accelerate the transition to a low carbon economy. So she's also pursuing a PhD, as you do, in energy policy at the University of Queensland, and she's developing a comprehensive roadmap for achieving a reliable net zero future in the Australian national electricity market. So her research explores the optimal portfolio of power generation technologies, the potential barriers and constraints to implementation, and the social and political implications of different options. She's published multiple papers on climate, energy topics. She leverages her academic and professional expertise to provide evidence-based and practical advice on decarbonisation and policy, and she's contributing to the global efforts to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Please welcome Steph with me. And last but certainly not least, Helen Degeling. She's a PhD qualified geologist with nearly 20 years experience in industry, academia and government. If you're in Queensland, everyone in the Department of Resources and the whole industry knows Helen very well. So we're very lucky that she's moved out of government back into industry. So now she's moved from the Director of Minerals Geoscience. She initiated Queensland Government's circular economy, secondary prospectivity, traceability and sustainable RE programs, processing programs, sorry Helen. So she's a passionate advocate for the growth and evolution of the mineral sector in line with the demands of a just transition towards decarbonisation and the adoption of ESG standards globally. So in her current role as manager ReMine Plus for Cobalt Blue, she's aiming to realise the opportunities for green metal extraction from mine waste to support the energy transition. So please welcome Helen as well. Okay, so what we're here today to discuss, Australian attitudes towards mining. So there are so many positive examples illustrating how Australian mining companies are tackling various aspects of public perception, from the big end of town to the small. We all need to be able to do this and do it well. So interestingly, if you were here on Tuesday afternoon, you would have seen that CSIRO actually put out a report on the Australian public's perception of mining. And you can see here basically what our attitudes are. And importantly, they've actually improved over the last decade from 2.8 to 3.1 on a 1.1 to 5 scale. And our overall acceptance of our industry is also increasing, which is pretty important. But as you can see from these findings, further improvement is contingent upon the industry's ability to address environmental concerns, engage with communities transparently, and ensure fair distribution of economic benefits. We're nearly there. So these are actually the mining acceptability factors ranked. So I'm going to get the girls to speak to each of these. So can you see it there or there?
Yeah, can you see it there? Yep.
So CSIRO surveyed the Australian public on what are the factors that lead to greater acceptability. So looking at these, Helen, do you want to start? Basically we're looking at, I think you summed it up best, so I'll let you start.
Thanks, Jo. Having been involved with CSIRO a little and helping with the release of the report on Tuesday for the public acceptance, public perceptions of the mining industry in Australia. What I see out of the factors that they've identified as being key to acceptability to the public of the mining industry is two general themes out of these 5 ranked factors. One is essentially the fair treatment of workers, that the people in the industry get a fair go, that there's no sexual harassment, which we know has been a big factor in the mining industry, and has come to light, even though we all knew about it, has been reported on more rigorously in the last few years, and then more generally workers' rights and that kind of thing. So it's around people, treatment of people, but then I would extend that into how the mining industry treats people in communities that are associated with them as well. And then the other big factor that we see on there, the other big theme, is around environment, so care and responsibility for the environment and making sure that we are doing best practice and exceeding best practice in that regard. So those are two very big themes, I think, people and planet, essentially.
I think on that, when we start talking about the planet, when we're putting in different environmental compliance and greenhouse gas compliance, and which is coming very tightly into the Australian context. And we had a really good conversation around the table this morning that when we're actually talking about the Australian space, and we are best practice in the world, right? And the key driver there is that it's in our consent conditions, it's in our EA approvals. If you don't comply with, the perfect rehabilitation or, greenhouse gas assessments or, environmental standards, then that's a non-compliance on your mining lease, and that's a risk to business, right? So we're finally putting a value behind the risk that we always knew was a thing. I think one of the biggest issues here is this is not an Australian-centric thing. Mining happens all around the world, and as things become more and more difficult to get a mine off the ground in Australia, we are going to be moving further abroad where we don't have these type of things happening. And what's to say that miners aren't going to continue? One of those strong pillars in mining acceptability of caring for the environment, which is an extension of the communities in which we're working.
Yeah, probably to add to that, Steph, one of the things I find is, as a mining industry, we're tackling legacy issues. So we didn't always get it right. And it takes a long, long time to rectify those things. But we've also got this kind of moving playing field. The goalposts keep changing. I remember kind of when I started my career in the industry, we were talking about greenhouse gases. Global warming was a big thing. Come 2004 in the UN, we started talking about things like ESG. Nobody knew what ESG was. More recently, and I suppose the subject of this conference, is net zero. We've actually got to go one step further. We've got to go to net positive. We've got to go to climate positive. We've got to go to water positive. So not only are we fighting the challenges and the legacies of what we've left behind, but we have to embrace this ever-changing world, and we have to go that one step further all the time.
And I guess, if we go back to the subject of the topic, which is about how we can change the perceptions of the public about mining and what we do, the activity that we all love, what do you think that mining companies can do to better engage with their communities to build trust and transparency?
I think, there's a lot we can do. The things to listen. I've worked for some big mining companies. It's very easy to think that you know best. You know best sitting within your ivory tower, sitting in the CBD. You've got to get on the ground. You've got to listen to the communities that you're part of. I'll give you some examples. I worked for one of the bigger mining companies. We were doing some exploration in Ecuador, and we thought that wouldn't it be a wonderful initiative to send 3 local Indigenous women to flash universities in the UN. These same people didn't have shoes. They had a subsistence type of lifestyle. What mattered to them was access to potable water, was access to sanitation. So we get it wrong sometimes. I think, people that get it right, and I think this is one of the things that Thiess is actually doing very well. So we've just won an award for the MAusIMM program, which is the Mount Arthur South Indigenous and Inclusive Training Program. And what we did was we engaged with the community. We took in 122 women and Indigenous members. We trained them up. We gave them access to real-life mining conditions. We provided them access to mentors, to coaches. We listened to them. And 92% of those same graduates are part of that workforce. And the impact it's had culturally, there are some wonderful examples elsewhere in the world. I think here in Australia, we're focused on economic benefits. We're obsessed with material welfare. We need to kind of look at what we do overseas. We apply those same standards that we have here when we operate in non-OECD jurisdictions. Newcrest, Newmont did some wonderful stuff in PNG. If you can invest in sustainable, diverse economies that run in parallel, so that sustain long after the resources in the ground are depleted, then you really leave a legacy behind. And that really, to me, is what this net positive is all about.
I think, leaving that legacy, we're dealing with a social license here. So that you're right, the rules do continue to change. It's only a tightening and adding more and more to what's being either formally or informally regulated. And I think one of those big things is that stakeholder and community engagement. I had one of the mines I worked on, we had lost all of social license to operate. We did something in an approvals process that we said we would never do in mining through a particular zone, which we claimed was a non-disturbance area until the next mine plan came out. The community revolted against the mine. We ended up with 1,500 complaints a year compared to our neighbouring mine, which had 17 that year, because we did not include community impact in mine plan. I mean, how simple is that to do? It's almost like you can get more tonnes out if you get people on side. This is not a one or the other. And I think one of the things here, and I kind of want to bring that back to the traditional views of the mining sector as being a hard, old white male perspective, right? And this is what we're trying to combat, because there are so many ways of getting things done, and I think that women know the best way to get things done without ruffling feathers, right? We just get on and do it. It's really, really cool to see that in this industry, and right here in this, not really a room, but let's just pretend it is, we've had a woman introduce us. Thank you, Michelle. We've had a female chair, and we've got women here who, I'm going to say we're doing well. We're not tokenistically brought on here, but not only, there are a majority of women in this audience here. I mean, how fantastic is that? That means we're already starting to change the dial. Now, one of the things of what WISER is about is how do we get these, great women in our industry into positions of influence. And that's one of the key things here where we're going to start changing perceptions. We spoke a little bit about the image of the Australian miner, or even, a multinational miner, as being, sorry, men, stuffy old straight white men in suits. How do we make that different? How do we include, local communities, people of colour, diverse backgrounds, not just women?
And maybe just, on that point, we often see token female appointments, we see quotas, unless you get women in key positions of decision-making power aligned to those strategy makers, unless you get women representation on your boards and on your ELT, the pipeline of talented women will continue to bleed from those organisations.
Completely agree.
And this is one of the things that we really spoke about, is that, the treatment of people, and this was a key conversation of this morning. The treatment of people. This is why you get so many young female engineers going into consulting houses, whether it's Big Four or if it's an engineering consulting house, because the industry representative is that women will always be the minority, not treated fairly, and we've seen this with the Safe at Work. What's come out in that process.
I want to bring it back to the
Sorry.
No, because I think it's such an important topic and I completely agree. But I wanted to make the point that you were saying about with the company that you worked for, where you had done something that then upset the community. And
wasn't me, by the way.
No, it wasn't. It would never be Steph. But one of the points that I wanted to make around gaining the trust of the public is the concept of transparency, which we don't do well in mining, and I think that includes things around sexual harassment in the mining industry, and I applaud companies like Rio Tinto who have published a very, very public and very publicised report on that in their company, but then more broadly around what are a company's activities. We have this really long history as miners, explorers, operators of it's our IP, we can't tell anybody about it, it's very, very secret. But that's not the way to gain the public's trust. It's not the way for anybody to have faith that we're doing the right thing and that we're going to continue to do the right thing.
Do you think we're also missing the boat around critical minerals? Because there's such an opportunity now with our potential in critical minerals for the energy transition, and really no one's talking about it. And that's really the low-hanging fruit to start building that increased public perception around mining. And then if people understand what those minerals are going towards, and your mobile phone, your EV, whatever it is, if there's more understanding around that, especially in younger generations, then really all of mining is the next step after that. You mean, Helen, you're in critical minerals yourself. What's your view on that?
I know that within my own family, and they know that, they know what I do for a living and that sort of thing, but educating them around the volume of metal that we need for the energy transition. I remember showing my mother a graph of we will need more copper in the next 25 years than we've mined in the whole of human history. And that she's an intelligent woman, she's a lawyer, she's received standing ovations at the UN, that kind of thing. She's not dumb. And yet she didn't know that blew her mind, and she then ran around and told all her friends about it, that sort of thing. But it's how do we get those messages out to then the people that will share the message for us and do it in a way that somebody else will listen to them, because somebody that has made up their mind against mining will not want to hear it from a mining company. They want to hear it from somebody that they trust. And so it's getting those advocates and champions as well in the communities.
And I think miners are really bad at telling the story. So I'm a coal miner. I'm a third generation coal miner. I'm very proud to be in the coal industry. It's even if you were to get rid of all the thermal coal in Australia, let's just say, for instance, that was to happen, we still need a bloody lot of metallurgical coal to support the energy transition. But there's also, if you get rid of thermal coal, look, that's a whole nother topic. I think one of the things is that there is such fantastic, I said before it's in approvals, right? But there is fantastic work there in rehabilitation, in environmental, standards, in, some of the most passionate people who have worked in environment that I have ever met have come from sites, who are the site enviros. And I think it's just that, you've got the issue of, how much do we share? Is it going to come against us? But you've also got the issue of that, if you're an engineer or if you're an engineer adjacent, which is everyone in the mining industry, there's a very strong logic in the way that we tell stories that often doesn't lend itself to the masses. And we're just not good at selling that message because we actually do a lot of really good work.
But I think, Steph, it comes down to education. It's, I know I'm immensely proud of this industry. I know that it's this industry that enables modern day living. We all know that. Everybody in this room knows that. But it's outside the halls, do they know it? And one of the things I love best about IMARC is when you see the primary school kids running around the booths and they're excited and they love the trucks and they love it, because that's where we need to target it. We need to take these conversations out of our kind of boardrooms and meeting rooms and into our living rooms and into the schools. The education system, I think, has kind of failed our kids. I think if you look at the CSIRO report, it's, the biggest age bracket is, in terms of opponents to the industry, is actually the kind of school leavers, and it's the younger demographic. So why is that? I mean, they're more consumer driven than anybody else in the population. And we all have our brand new iPhones every year, our new laptops, but there's a strong opposition there. So I think tackling education, and often you see these kind of, I suppose, information sessions, they target uni students, whether it's for recruitment. You need to get back into primary school kids, tackle the very socialist left kind of leaning education system, but that's going to reap some benefits, I think.
And on education, we had, the geological degree removed from Newcastle University, which is, mining engineering removed from University of Queensland. These are mining hubs in Australia, and you can't do a mining engineering degree.
At the same time, though, the chemical engineering and sustainable energy, their numbers are going through the roof, especially with women, so pleasingly.
Look, I think that getting those young people on board is key to the future, and we say that in all sorts of industries. So let's continue that, and that message that if you want to see change, then be part of that change, and the best way to change something is from the inside. So let's get them in there.
I think we've only got another couple of minutes, don't we? Got 3 minutes.
I want to tackle number one now.
Okay,
yeah,
go. Go, Steph.
I've had my point on sexual harassment. I think that this is one sticking point, and some of the stories I've heard from different people on site, and through the camps, through the HR organisations within organisations, about some of the behaviours that are, oh, that's fine, he's a good worker. This is the point I was trying to get to earlier. We're seeing young female engineers not wanting to enter the mining industry because of those perceptions. I don't have solutions for this. I'm hoping that you guys do.
Coming back now to that point, I think that a lot of, we all have a lot of strong male friends in the industry. It is a male-dominated industry, but all of us have worked, we're not newbies, we've worked there for a long time. We've got some strong male supporters, some strong male mentors, but every single one of the very strong, accomplished and high-achieving women up here has been subjected to sexual harassment at some point, and we've shared those stories amongst us privately, but
some of that's happened at this conference.
And I was going to say, that was my next point. Some of that has happened at this conference in the last couple of days. So do not think that it does not still happen. We need to do more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of shifting awkwardly because it is such an uncomfortable subject, but it's one we really do all have to speak about.
And is this, I think maybe I'm trying to start bringing my points earlier together. And I do applaud BHP for doing a lot. They're putting some very talented women in very senior positions, same with Thiess. But one of the things that BHP is trying to do, and I'm not quite sure I have no experience of how well they're doing it, but is to make the camp safer. I know in WA that there's a lot of effort into going to making it more of a community feel as opposed to more of a, get into your donga, have a sleep, off you go. It's, very transient. And when people feel like they're part of a community, they act like they're part of a community as well. I wonder, what would be the link, and we haven't quite seen this yet because we don't have the data because it hasn't really occurred yet, but when we start to get to parity of women in leadership positions, in board positions, and in that C-suite, is that when you think we're going to start seeing some change?
I'm going to refer back now to the CSIRO panel on the report that was on Tuesday, and we it wasn't by design. Like this panel is WISER members, so it was by design that it was all women. But our panel on Tuesday evening was all women, but not by design. It was just people who were chosen because they were the best person in the field that CSIRO chose to discuss that topic. And so we talked a little bit about how wasn't it great that it was an all-female panel. But not deliberately. We could talk because we were respected members of that. But then one of our panel members brought it back to saying, well, she's still the only woman on a board. She's still the only woman in the room in a lot of conversations. And, for me, I think, well, thank you to her for being the one of the trailblazers and breaking a path so that it's easier for me in my career or for others. But, we still need to keep doing that hard work so that the young women behind us, every person has an easier journey than the one that went before.
And I'd just like to make a note to everyone here in the audience that as much as, this is a WISER, an all-female panel, that I absolutely chose you three women because you're all leaders in your field. It has nothing to do with being a woman. It's actually just because you're amazing people in the industry. It's irrelevant.
I think it is. Thank you, Jo. But we talked about equity before. And equity is very different to equality. And equity is about how do we get everyone to where they have the same opportunity for a job, or, the analogy is how do we get everyone to be able to see over the fence, right? You've got one tall person, they can see over the fence. Cool. That's called privilege. You've got another person and they might be standing on top of someone's shoulders, right? That's privilege for them, but not so much, equity for the person under. How do we create the stool for someone to stand on? And that is where, the quotas come into it. That is where we need to have, it's ways of getting people from diverse backgrounds into those positions where they can sit on a panel and they can share lived experience. Because I think until we start changing, I think I'm starting to bring all of my thoughts together. Until we start changing the idea that it is, an older generation of white men leading, and we start to see diverse people in those positions, it's not relatable. And I think until we get to that point where we can start, making it more equitable for access into the industry, I think that we will always struggle with perception.
Maybe I know that there's a lady, it's like being at the Oscars and you're kind of being pushed off the stage, but we are being told to wrap up. But I just want to thank Jo, our moderator. Jo is absolutely the star of the show who pulls this all together. She's the founder of WISER, and we wouldn't be here without you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.